Despite being pulled over for no apparent reason, State Attorney Danielle Rivers remained composed and, according to her dashcam footage, it was 8:46 p.m., and the revelations of a whistleblower rocked the entire city. During the intersection of Magnolia Drive and Appalachia Parkway, when Danielle Rivers shifted into the left turn lane in her black Audi, her Thursday had been everything but short. As she was on her way home after a late meeting at the downtown office of the state attorney, I had a heated confrontation with a young prosecutor and a mountain of case evaluations to go through. Nothing unusual. She drummed her fingers on the driving wheel and turned the radio to a low whisper over hidden evidence. When she waited for the light to turn on, her gaze darted to the rearview mirror, where she noticed a marked patrol car approaching from behind. Officers frequently run license plates at crossroads, so she didn't think it was a big issue. As if by magic, the light went green and Danielle swerved to leave the patrol car close behind. As she proceeded beyond the subsequent block, she observed the flashing of blue lights in her mirror. She blinked and then verified her speed. 20.8% of the time, there was no signal loss and no registration expiration. The limit was 30. After putting her phone down, she entered the parking lot of a closed CV, waited for the gravel to crunch under her feet as she shifted into park, a low sigh escaping her lips. Along came a pair of cops, one of whom lingered just inside the back passenger door. The other, a younger. She was approached by a Caucasian cop who had short blonde hair and reddened cheeks as he approached the driver's side window. With a steady, forceful tone, Danielle rolled it down, saying, "Good evening, officer. Is there a reason I'm being pulled over?" The officer didn't respond immediately and instead glanced across to the other police. "I will retrieve her registration and licensing paperwork for you. She has not yet moved." She spoke evenly, but she wanted to know why she was being stopped again. The second officer shifted his weight, but no one spoke. Danielle groped for the glove compartment while he steadied his gaze and breathed softly, his hands resting on his belt. With a slow and methodical motion, her hands revealed. The blonde cop took a quick look at her license before returning his gaze to her face. "Your plate was highlighted when we ran it," and he mumbled something about how it was for her request. He took a moment to lick his lips. "We're still making sure that Danielle's voice didn't sharpen a hair. Anyway, you pulled me over regardless of the reason my car was flagged," and neither police replied. Despite her lack of dread, she could feel her heart racing in her throat. She glanced back at the officer, her emotions twisted into a ball of fury and astonishment. "You realize I've committed no violation," she said. "Unless there's a good cause to hold me, I wasn't speeding and my tags are still valid." Her expression shifted to one of bewilderment as he abruptly ended their conversation. Then, without saying a word again, she silently retrieved the second piece of identification from the glove compartment and raised it. The Florida State Attorney's Office, with a crisp silver monogram of her name. He leaned in closer, blinked, and then straightened. "Oh," he muttered something behind her. Daniel's eyebrows arched as the second cop advanced toward him. "Ma'am," since we didn't recognize him. "We regret for any confusion caused by the lengthy quiet. I didn't think it was important." According to the first officer, there are instances where the system fails to match and tags are marked as flagged. The officer returned her license and took a step back as she raised her hand, saying, "I've had enough." She didn't express gratitude or immediately get in her car, so you're free to leave. As the patrol car drew away, she remained motionless for a few moments, allowing herself to be absorbed by the situation. On Thursday, August 1st, she silently whispered into her phone, using the voice memo app. No reason provided for the traffic stop. She paused, and then she said, "I'm accustomed to being asked questions in court. Tonight I approached a stranger on the street for an answer, but it was far from the last chapter in that parking lot." As the sun rose the next day, Danielle Rivers found herself seated at her kitchen island, ready to face the day. With her dark coffee in one hand and her eyes fixed on her phone, she had mentally reenacted the traffic jam a dozen times. She hardly slept the night before morning, not because of fear, but because something persisted. Puzzled by her reasoning, the officer flinched, and there was no explanation. Carmen Rivers, her mother, entered the room in a gentle verdant robe while he perused her credentials. Carmen reached for the kettle and added, You're up early with your hair wrapped in a scarf. Danielle nodded, her eyes fixed on her phone. Are you okay? She said, pausing before responding. According to her, 2 officers pulled me over yesterday night for no apparent reason. Carmen moved at a snail's pace. What do you mean they said my tags were detected for no apparent reason? Thereafter came clean about their ignorance of the reason for Carmen's still hand hovering over the kettle. Danielle looked up as her pupils widened. It wasn't until I identified myself that they recognized me. Carmen took a seat across from her after a lengthy pause. It is necessary for you to know that I did. Danielle raised her phone to her ear and stated, I've already filed the Dashcam request and created a voice memo. For a little while, there was a dense, knowing stillness between them. The type that can only be found amongst ladies who have experienced enough life to no longer be shocked by anything new. You know what Carmen eventually said, even when they're disappointed? Subsequently, Danielle showed up for her workplace dressed in her signature gray pantsuit and flat shoes. Nadia, her assistant, timidly said, Hey, I saw your post, as she welcomed her at the door. As they strolled down the corridor side by side, Nadia spoke as Danielle gazed side to side. Within 3 hours of becoming live, it has received over 2,000 reposts and is going viral. Danielle let out a sigh as she hurriedly unlocked her office door and entered. No mahogany desk, no pricey artwork, just a wall of case files that was the room's modesty. With her mother's portrait and a framed law degree displayed in front of a courtroom, a manila envelope bearing the stamp of the Public Records Division TPD. The Dashcam was placed on her desk. She extracted the USB drive, inserted it into her laptop, and the screen flashed with fuzzy night footage. With the sirens blaring and the police cars closing in, she pressed play. The audio was very clear, and there was no indication of probable cause, just general chit-chat between the 2 officers. Around the 2-minute mark, Danielle moved in to examine her more attentively. The cop said, This plate is clean, but we should still question her. Perhaps she's trying to hide something. With her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed on the screen, Danielle cut off the recording. She decided to give her old acquaintance, journalist Theo Whitman of the Tallahassee Tribune, a call. Theo, who fearlessly pursued truth regardless of its consequences, answered the second ring. Your tweet popped up in my inbox right before I was going to give you a call, Danielle. I have Dashcam footage. It does what I think it does worse, she stated frankly. You wanted to demonstrate that. The call was interrupted. I will be there in 10 minutes. 10 minutes after that, Theo entered her office. With a camera bag slung over one shoulder and the weathered press badge fastened to his blazer, he has that certain look. That caused others to be truthful with him, their eyes somewhat furrowed with weariness but vigilant. Danielle passed the file to Theo, who nodded in understanding. And this is currently off limits. He sat back slowly once the film concluded, his expression revealing his disapproval. If you're serious about making this public, you should know that Danielle remained silent when Theo shut down the laptop. Theo completed her sentence on her behalf, and I don't understand what type of system allows this to happen to me. She confirmed with a nod that it is indeed affecting those without official identification. However, they were both unaware that the department was already formulating its narrative. The Tallahassee Police Department received the tape on Friday afternoon, and it did not match. Issued a brief, nebulous 2-paragraph formal statement. They explained the stop as routine, citing a technical difference. There was no indication that the officer had failed to provide an explanation for the stop in the vehicle's registration, which had triggered an electronic warning. Danielle remained seated in her office, evading responsibility over the Dashcam footage. As Danielle read that they're ignoring it, her lips slightly parted in surprise as Nadia presented her with a printed copy. Nadia remained silent and observed as if everything were insignificant. Breathing deeply, Danielle restarted her laptop, loaded up the clip, and played again the exact moment the officer stated. Her stomach churned and she dismissed the video window, opening her email. Perhaps she's hiding something. She began to put "to whom it may concern" in the subject line before pausing. Until the public could view her findings unfiltered, she was hesitant to submit a statement to the agency. Same evening, Danielle shared a 54-second Dashcam video from the comfort of her living room couch. She posted on her verified social media account without any captions or remarks. By daybreak, the video alone had 80,000 views. As the number of comments surpassed 500,000, some people were shocked and others were astonished. Whilst some expressed their wrath, others lauded Danielle's poise, and yet others posed the same unsettling inquiry. What would happen to me if they treated a state attorney this way? Meanwhile, in the precinct headquarters across town, sitting across from the investigator from Internal Affairs, was Cop Blake Denton, the blonde cop from the stop. He sat up straight, his jaw clenched, and Joyce Linwood leaned forward, clicking her pen. As we continued our patrol near Magnolia, Denton cleared his throat and said, "Walk me through it again." Joyce arched an eyebrow when she noticed the Audi changed lanes and alerted the plate system. Joyce flicked open a folder, and I have no idea why he paused. It simply appeared. That vehicle's tags are up to date and there are no alerts in the database. After Denton looked down, she allowed that dangling for a moment, as if the machine had glitched. Next, did either of you or your companion inform the driver of the reason for the stop? It wasn't right away. Joyce reclined on her chair, uncertain. The woman you stopped was the current state attorney. Weren't you aware of that, Officer Denton? She sent him a fierce look before swiftly shaking her head and showing us her ID. Can you grasp the gravity of the situation? He only nodded, and the tape is now available to the public. Theo Whitman was inundated with calls from all around town, as if it were everyone's problem. A syndicated crime podcast presenter from Seattle was among the local news outlets that requested an interview. He contacted Danielle and told her that individuals should be allowed to create their own narratives. She asked if she should continue pushing the record because it is not a story. As Danielle peered out the window, he inquired as to whether they would push back. Outside, children played basketball on the street. According to her, Theo, the weather was the type of muggy afternoon when everything seemed a bit heavier. If I allow this to go unchecked, I will inform every public defender that this isn't just about me. Theo sighed, and I do think he should have walked into my courtroom knowing that being silent is the safer option. She consented to a one-on-one interview with Theo that Sunday, so we're all set. At his modest studio close to FAMU campus, the space consisted of simple, empty walls. Mike had 2 seats, and Danielle sported a plain blue top with her hair pulled back. Theo moved closer as she applied cosmetics, and it was at that moment that you realized this wasn't just any old pit stop. When the officer failed to provide a straightforward response to Danielle's question, "Why am I being pulled over?" she glanced into the camera. "I've prosecuted actual criminals, and that's when I realized something was wrong." She hesitated. Whenever I see stop-and-go situations on body camera footage, I have to wonder what may have caused them. Because the way things begin often dictates their outcome. Conflicts often arise from quiet beginnings. However, if the interview were to become viral, it would prompt the department to move more quickly than they had anticipated. By the time Monday came around, the video had surpassed 2 million views, and Danielle Rivers' name had become a social media craze. In addition to hashtags such as "State Attorney Stopped" and "Pulled Over While Black," 12 local stations and 2 national media sources had aired her conversation with Theo. Beyond the confines of the city, it had transcended its original status as a mere local tale. It made it into people's homes throughout the nation, but as it became popular, it also received criticism, and Danielle sat at her computer, reading the comments. Among them were Missouri's retired highest court judge, as well as activists, teachers, and attorneys, even though many who praised her for her courage were equally vicious. "Dude, it's tiresome how you always bring up race in every conversation. This was just another ordinary day." With a document and a bottle of water in her hand, Nadia, another entitled bureaucrat, stepped in. "Danielle, you need to quit reading those. I've had worse experiences with cross-examinations." "Yeah, but those individuals were about to do time in prison. Now they're simply irate slobs in sweatpants." Danielle couldn't help but laugh, if only for a few moments. Curious, she shut the laptop and wondered, what's the folder? The Miami Herald, Tampa Bay Tribune, and MSNBC were the recipients of Nadia's interview request. The narrative wasn't waiting for Danielle, so she shook her head gently, refusing to let it breathe just yet. The same day, in the presence of municipal officials, Chief Ronald Breck had a brief news conference outside TPD headquarters. We are currently conducting an internal examination of this incident, as he read from a prepared statement. We understand that there was room for improvement in the clarity of our message during the halt. However, at this moment, we have not discovered any indication of wrongdoing. The inquiries came swiftly. Have the policemen been granted leave? Why does the video disprove your account? And was the traffic stop motivated by race? It is under evaluation and we are collaborating. Chief Breck provided mechanical responses. We want to assure you that we are dedicated to being transparent, but the comments section of the live stream didn't buy it. As the night progressed, Theo's fury intensified and he eventually texted Danielle, "Theo, you must view this immediately." A short while later, an uncut clip appeared. Video captured something that the Dashcam missed: the traffic stop, as seen through a shaky mobile phone footage from a parked car across the street. The second cop, who was not seen on video on the Dashcam, was seen imitating Danielle's voice with an accusatory tone. It was brief, understated, but obvious as he made his way back to the patrol vehicle. The officer had laughed while Danielle played it 3 times, each time at a slower pace. Just as she was about to push save, the phone rang and Carmen's name came up. "My darling, I saw the latest film of you. Are you all right?" Danielle gazed out her window into the peaceful neighborhood. "I'm doing okay. I was just exhausted from hearing her mother's stern, 'You're not fine' message." It's frustrating that they can degrade you and then hide behind a badge, but Danielle remained silent. After a little pause, Carmen softly said, "You have devoted your life to protecting the law. Your day has come when the law must answer to you." The following day, Theo published an article with the heading, "In addition to the Dashcam, the public-facing bodycam request has not been addressed as of yet." Meanwhile, more and more drivers were coming forward, including those who had lodged complaints years earlier after experiencing similar stops. One of which, a school counselor from Wakulla County called Marcus Edens, contacted Theo. "They stopped me last year and said I ran a red light that didn't exist. I reported it, but nothing came of it." Another was Brianna Lofton, a single mother who was stopped at 5 o'clock in the morning on her way to work. TPD started to feel the strain as she repeated the same story without providing any context or explanation. However, the issue wasn't limited to outside sources. Within the department, several officers had begun to speak in code with reporters. Leadership morale was low and tensions were rising amongst the ranks. Danielle continued to show up for work, examine cases, and attend hearings despite the allegations swirling around her. Until another idea emerged, she let her quiet to convey what words failed to. However, the release of the bodycam film, which no one had anticipated, only served to exacerbate the situation. Danielle Rivers was a little girl from Quincy, Florida, before she became the state attorney for Florida's 2nd Judicial Circuit, where her mother, Carmen, worked night shifts at a hospital 30 minutes west of Tallahassee before suffering a devastating stroke. Clarence, her father, taught mathematics at the high school in their town. Before Danielle reached 9, she began to act differently. She became quieter in class, began devouring all available literature. Mrs. Beauchamp, a librarian in her community, would frequently preserve thick volumes of case law for later use. Around the age of 12, she witnessed her cousin's arrest, and she had access exclusively to biographies of former civil rights attorneys. He had been sitting on the porch with a Sprite in front of his house for what the deputy deemed as lingering suspiciously. In her memory, she could still hear her uncle's screams, her aunt's sobs, and her cousin's cries. Even at the age of 17, Danielle couldn't get the feeling that he had anticipated this. In the church basement at 23, she was coordinating free legal clinics. At Howard Law, she crossed the stage as the second-best student. Her teachers affectionately referred to her as the Scalpel. She returned to Florida without any illusions, not because she was boisterous, but because she was meticulous. Instead of becoming a famous actress, Danielle always dreamed of being a physician whose words could mend shattered systems. She took on her first high-profile lawsuit against the local police, using evidence rather than volume to bring them responsible. She was the driving force behind the prosecution's successful conviction of black youths in Leon County who were accused of falsifying drug charges. "Justice isn't a destination," she told a local newspaper back then. But that didn't stop her from celebrating. That remark ended up on posters in nearby schools. It's a shifting goal, but you keep chasing it anyhow. Carmen framed one of the clippings and set it on her dresser, despite her hatred of the spotlight. Danielle shook her head in disbelief as she sat in her office and reread the same article. Now that she thinks about it, she shut the tab and went to the window, where the traffic outside was normal. As individuals hurried to their various lunch breaks, errands, and meetings, the world kept spinning. Nadia gently tapped on the door and walked inside. A lady called Rhonda Ellis is calling. Asserts that you were both members of the Tallahassee Human Rights Commission in the past, and Danielle arched an eyebrow before putting her on the phone. Danielle, it's Rhonda. How are you doing? It's been a long. Despite all you're going through, I wanted you to hear this, Rhonda, so please don't spend any more time. I recently heard rumors over the grapevine, and Daniel's voice became low as he said, "What's going on?" The TPD union is preparing a legal defense, arguing that the stop was warranted due to increased threats against government officials. Regarding protocol for random monitoring, Daniel straightened up. That's not protocol. I get that it's fiction, but they're hoping to throw enough noise to confuse people. Danielle clenched her teeth and said, "They're wrong." Rhonda hesitated for a while before continuing. Isn't it better to just remain silent and out of harm's way? No one would hold it against you. The issue is that too many people no longer blame quietness, even if Danielle's voice remained constant. Danielle and Carmen sat in the den night expecting it to happen. There is no television. Instead, there is the faint hum of the fridge and the squeak of the ancient floorboards. You're causing people to get anxious. Carmen prepared 2 cups of sweet tea and slipped one under their seats. Without raising an eyebrow, she answered, "Good." Carmen mumbled a giggle to herself. Danielle arched an eyebrow in response. Danielle took a drink. You taught me to see clearly, not to be nice while the rules are being changed in real time. Carmen extended her palm toward hers, and then, without moving an eye, they sat in quiet contemplation. The sort that could be shared without being filled, yet Danielle maintained her composure unbeknownst to them. The department was getting ready to release film in an effort to bury the story. Decided to do the exact opposite, and on a Wednesday afternoon discreetly leaked body cam footage. Only a link posted on the department's website. No news conference. No media notice. Under the section titled Supplemental Transparency Materials, although everything may be conveniently located online. In as little as 1 hour, someone had already extracted the crucial part and shared it across several platforms. The vision was a bit wobbly, but it was clear enough to see Officer Denton, and the sound was adequate, as he mutters to his buddy on the way back to the patrol car. "Do you know who I am?" He chuckled when his companion, Officer Casey Drew, uttered a remark that failed to register at first. She embodies those 4 words in her Dashcam clip. After then, the video went viral as media and attorneys alike responded. A diverse group of individuals, including students, professors, and activists, started calling for change. As Danielle sat in her office, the city's absence took on an air of cowardice rather than caution. With Theo standing across from her, he didn't utter a word as they watched the film on headphones. She removed the earphones cautiously, her expression betraying the profile she had often portrayed. Since nobody would be looking this closely, Theo talked cautiously in the hopes of getting away with it. "I would have been nothing more than another gripe if I hadn't had my title," she remarked, and she was correct. The mayor was under increasing pressure, and that document ended up in a drawer in City Hall. Protesters, albeit not in the thousands, began to congregate outside of neighborhood organizers, pastors, and teachers. So that it may be overheard that night, Mayor Kelvin Rhodes convened a secret meeting. He slammed his fists on the conference table and screamed, "I need this handled with Chief Breck and the City Council." Although Chief Breck was uneasy, the mayor quickly said, "We are conducting a full review. You have had 6 days. If you still don't understand, maybe it's because you're the one who needs help." The public watched the tape and heard the officers' statements. Councilwoman Marissa Glenn joined in to say that we are now dealing with a liability problem. Breck attempted to defend his cops, but if she sues, she has a good case since the body cam is a nightmare. Unfortunately, his statements fell on deaf ears. We must avoid making rash judgments that lower morale inside the department. If you're concerned about morale, Kelvin cut him off. The next day, I'll be worried about a malfunctioning system. Instead of discipline or termination, both officers were placed on administrative leave. The first formal effect, though, was that Danielle learned about it through a headline rather than the city. Carmen showed up uninvited at the workplace that afternoon, her lips pressed firmly on the phone as she peered at it. On the go with a little bag of food that you apparently haven't eaten yet, pulled pork sliders, they sat in the break room while Danielle slightly grinned. You know me too well. While a mother and daughter have a peaceful chewing session, free from the distractions of legal emails and press calls, you become aware of the leave. Between meals, Carmen wanted to know how I felt about the judicial system, while Danielle considered her options. No, but their wriggling about suggests they're aware they're mistaken. After Carmen dried her hands, Danielle gazed out the window. From here on out, I will continue that evening. Isabel Marie's voicemail chimed once again, this time on her phone. Hispanic officer, fresh to the force, anxious voice. Hello, Miss Rivers, I don't know you, but I've seen things that I'm not comfortable discussing just now. I have something important to tell you, though, and the reality is that you are not alone. Danielle pressed play again. Her voice quivered. After noting the number, Isabel returned the phone the following morning and answered nearly instantly. She spoke very softly, almost whispering. I have the transcripts of their conversations from before they arrested you. Would you mind sending it to me? Danielle's voice sounded serene, and it's much worse than what's out there. While Daniel stopped, I beg you to shield me from harm. However, the message Isabel conveyed would completely change the topic and make individuals face the unsavory aspect of police work. It is so seldom approved that Isabel Marie's audio file made it through in the stillness of her living room. Danielle retrieved the message from her laptop later that night. She sported a baggy hoodie, leggings, and a bare face. The previous week had been exhausting, and her inbox had been a veritable battleground. The file was just 2 minutes long, and her voicemail box was already filled. As soon as Danielle pressed play, radio static and monotony began playing, followed by a voicemail. Joking about, let's go over that one that seems like someone's about to go over into a higher tax bracket. Denton's next wager is that she returned from court feeling like $1,000,000. Then we drew attention to her attempt at lecturing us. People with her attitude always seemed to be the exception. The kicker was that Danielle, who was sitting still, was wearing a suit and was black. She paused the audio but couldn't rewind while driving an Audi, ignored the speaker once more before putting down her laptop and staring up at the ceiling. She had heard terrible things in the past, and now the quiet was growing so dense that it was like gravity. Insults spoken in the bowels of the courthouse, assumptions whispered in private chambers. Code for terms like overqualified, but this wasn't a whisper by morning. Danielle found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the systemic. Unchallenged, she applied a little layer of makeup while intently observing her reflection. Her eyes appeared more fatigued than normal. She made her way to the kitchen, visibly exhausted from suppressing her emotions. As Carmen stirred the scrambled eggs, a soft radio melody hummed in the background. Danielle shook her head in disapproval when her mother questioned if she got any sleep without turning around. Carmen poured a little amount of coffee and glanced across at the woman. She didn't need to contact the person who provided you the material. Do you trust her? What are you going to do with the eggs that Carmen plated and set aside? Danielle took a while to respond. As she took a drink of her coffee, Carmen couldn't help but notice that her hands quivered just a little bit. Listen, Daniel, I'm not trying to make you seem invulnerable when in fact you're not. Oh, I see. Daniel averted his gaze. I just do not possess the emotional wherewithal to deal with this matter. You have been living for far too long. What you are experiencing is not strength, but rather survival. Carmen leaned forward. The words lingered between them while Danielle remained silent. Afterwards, she had a face-to-face meeting with Isabel. They settled on a peaceful cafe just off Highway 90. Isabel appeared much younger in person, fussing with her keys as she walked inside a cafe with more tea selections than tables. You're risking a lot by coming, she remarked, thanking Danielle as she sat down. With a hushed voice, Isabel looked around and said, This isn't unique to you. It occurs frequently. It's not official, but they do have a list of names and license plates. Why are you informing me that Danielle leaned in when they do and even bother to write anything down? I joined to defend people, not profile them, so Isabel swallowed hard. Danielle examined her for a time. Subsequently nodded. Do you happen to have any documentation of that? No, that is the point. It is culturally transmitted through humor. Determining who gets a warning and who doesn't, Danielle let out a sigh. I want to testify about something that doesn't leave fingerprints, and that's usually the hardest part, Isabel remarked. I'm exhausted and sick of turning a blind eye, Danielle blurted out. Afterwards, when Danielle had her notebook, they would do it properly in her workplace that night. With Nadia's assistance, Danielle went over the department's misbehavior reports from the previous 5 years. It seemed like a handful of the complaints were about tag checks and late-night stops. With her eyes closed, Danielle reclined back, her rationales scattered. I'm weary, Danielle said, her eyes slowly opening as Nadia whispered, Are you all right? Danielle glanced at her and said, Do you want me to clear your schedule for next week? If the city continues to act as if nothing transpired, I will remind them in courtroom after courtroom. Last but not least, proof would emerge, and it wouldn't be from a whistleblower before she could present the truth in court. Unexpectedly, Danielle received a call from someone who had previously been silent. She was preparing her notes for a community justice panel when the call came in on a Friday morning from a restricted number. While in the FSU Law Center, she was about to let it ring out when she felt compelled to pick up, This is Chief Ronald Breck speaking, and the other person sounded quite hesitant when they spoke to Miss Rivers. Danielle hesitatingly said, I don't do backroom negotiations. I'd rather talk to you face to face. He didn't say it hastily, Chief. It was only a discussion. Sure, there's no press, no agenda, just us, she added after pausing once more. They agreed to meet at the Lemoyne Art Center in downtown, but not at your office. Distant from the precinct and the courts, neutral territory is peaceful and open. At the rear courtyard, under the shade of a towering oak tree, Danielle was the first to show up. She sported a pair of plain pants and a blue blouse, no jacket, no business attire whatsoever. Surprisingly, Chief Breck arrived 5 minutes later than expected, hands crossed. He appeared older and heavier than normal, sunglasses tucked under his shirt collar. Thank you for meeting with me, he replied, as if the burden of everything had finally settled on him. He nodded as they sat across from one another, but she remained expressionless. Everything that transpired shouldn't have happened. I've heard every word and seen every frame of the video. I accept responsibility for the fact that it happened even if Danielle didn't move. Danielle came in closer, her voice barely audible as she said, You either take responsibility or you're saying those words. I've been doing this job for 26 years and they're safer than quiet. The chief let out a deep sigh. That's the problem, she explained. No matter how many times I look at the system, I still can't claim to have predicted this. There are kind individuals working in that division. You should have directed his gaze elsewhere. Of course, not everyone's Denton or Drew. Yet, wonderful folks may be found in each community. Her response was, The culture doesn't come from us. It comes from on high. He remained silent for a while before gently expressing his desire to alter things, all because of what you let slide unchallenged. Nonetheless, I am at a loss as to how to begin. After a slow blink from Daniel, you must step aside. Instead of taking the lead, he massaged the nape of his neck after the blow. She said, I don't have time to teach grown men, which is why you're not pulling punches. After a lengthy pause, I had already written my resignation on how to treat people with respect. In what Breck called a mutually clarifying nod, Danielle voluntarily inclined her head, and he nodded in agreement. She closely observed him, attempting to decipher his hidden meanings. He proceeded, but before I go, my goal is to establish an internal cultural assessment board that will remain in place indefinitely. Actual anti-bias training that is required by the community and overseen by civilians. Something that Danielle crossed her arms. I know they are only beginning points, but please don't treat them as sufficient answers. Once more, he nodded. Would you like to be involved in shaping it? Daniel paused. I'm not a consultant, he said, but people will listen to you. While she pondered, she glanced upwards at the trees above and saw a squirrel skitter over the bark. Peering through the foliage, I will provide feedback on what she said, but I will not sugarcoat the facts. It was reasonable for him to get up and go, but she still hadn't finished. The issue, according to Danielle, involves more than simply Denton and Drew. It affects all the names that were unreported. This is what you're attempting to accomplish for every individual who lacked the badge or a position. It will be insignificant unless it reaches them. Brett gulped, and he moved away with a subtle nod that said, "I hear you." Danielle sat alone for a time, she felt neither relieved nor triumphant. She felt just motionless. At the workplace, Nadia greeted her at the entrance and insisted that Danielle accompany her inside because of something important. A printed copy of an email from Officer Casey Drew was presented to her by Nadia. Danielle read the first word aloud from a digital copy of a sworn declaration that was included, which was brief and handwritten. "Officer Drew, I'm sorry for the unprofessional way I behaved and spoke during our stop on August 1st. Nadia mumbled as she ceased reading, her preconceptions unsupported by proof. He approached Danielle, who sat down with her hands in her lap and felt her chest relax. Albeit little, 2 policemen have been implicated, and the department head has resigned. Danielle had one final statement to make before the city's excuses ran dry. Notarized and fully signed, Officer Casey Drew's statement was a lightning bolt that sliced through the media. He acknowledged profiling Danielle without denying it or using fancy language. The driver said that he pulled her stop since she didn't resemble anybody. As Danielle perused the text in her office, her back straightened. No one should be operating such a car in those areas. Minutes after Theo's call, you saw that she nodded, her hands calm and her face expressionless. Despite his inability to perceive her, I did. I can't recall seeing anything similar and perhaps ever as news spread that Theo hadn't cleared it with his union. Danielle chose to remain silent. He recently went to legal affairs and expressed his inability to continue dealing with it. She inquired about any changes. Daniel stared in surprise when Isabel came forward during the interview and Breck resigned. A guy finally admitted what was already on tape after a huge chain reaction of pressure. Still, that same afternoon, Theo noted that a crack in the wall is still a crack. You should be aware that Isabel Marant followed up with Danielle via messaging. Attached to the email was a file with a comprehensive inventory of all internal complaints, confidential information that has been submitted to the TPD during the past 4 years. Its names, dates, and most importantly, Daniel's study into why most had been shuttered charges, including acts of excessive force and suspect tag stops. And, in more than 60% of those instances, the drivers that filed the complaints were either black or Latino, and the stops were in certain places. In all 3 of these areas, Lakeside, Saxon Heights Old Town, and Saxon Heights, the situation had escalated beyond her control, so Danielle got up from her chair and called a news conference. The event took place the next morning on the steps of the courthouse, with only a table and no podium or flashing signs. With a microphone and a manila folder clutched in her palm, a slew of local media, law students, clergy, participants and ordinary individuals who had diligently followed the narrative from the very beginning. Some people were carrying homemade banners, with one reading, "If she can't drive home in peace." Standing before the microphone, Danielle Rivers introduced herself as the state attorney and said, "What hope do I have? And you are already aware that I was stopped without a warrant, an explanation, or any respect whatsoever." Nonetheless, this was not an isolated occurrence, which you may be unaware of. The folder was raised by her. Inside were grievances lodged by members of our community. All those people, neighbors, friends, and children who were singled out, interrogated, or treated like second-class citizens. She allowed herself to be silent when more than half of these cases went unanswered. The journalists rushed forward with questions, but she ignored them and instead thanked the audience. "I've been silent for long enough." The video was just 2 minutes long before he retreated and down the stairs. Gained widespread attention by midday thanks to social media, which amplified the impact on drivers who had previously questioned their abilities. It's possible that I was thinking too much or moving too quickly when I started speaking out. The city council is under increasing strain. consented to initiate a third-party investigation into all pending allegations dating back 5 years. In a public speech, the governor emphasized the need for openness in the police force at all levels. And, in a surprising turn of events, the comment made by Officer Drew ignited a discussion within the department. Meanwhile, a number of younger cops publicly supported Isabel Mora and requested ethical retraining. Danielle received praise for her bravery in anonymous interviews, but instead of celebrating, she returned to her job. In her office, she reviewed evidence for an ongoing murder case, talked with prosecutors, and approved 2 diversion programs. She drove herself home alone in the same Audi later that night, and she was accepted into the program for first-time nonviolent offenders. She glanced over her shoulder for an instant as a patrol car drove up next to her at the Magnolia Drive signal. In the driver's seat, a young black cop nodded slowly and simply. After that night, Carmen gave me a call. I watched the news conference, and you spoke the necessary words. You spoke it like if your dad had said it, Carmen remarked, and Daniel remained silent. Daniel couldn't help but crack a little smile. He despised people who made a fuss. Carmen giggled quietly as she replied, "The truth doesn't need to be shouted." "I'm not finished yet," Danielle said steadily as she peered out the window at the night. However, there was one last message she had for the future before she could end this chapter. Not only that, but the university auditorium was jam-packed and not in the typical way that a midweek legal panel is often full. Together with a plethora of former students, teachers, and staff, members of the community, including a handful of judges who had been out of the bench for more than 10 years standing backstage, Danielle watched as the audience gathered around the moderator, Professor Lyle Fenwick, who nodded subtly to her. His voice carried without a mic, and he was a long-time mentor who was rough but principled. His eyes were keen. He had been among the first to inform her, many years ago, that one need not shout in order to be heard. When her name was given, there was tremendous and instant applause. You simply need to get people to listen. Not raucous or jubilant, but purposeful and courteous, and the reason people stood was not because of her fame. Nonetheless, she approached the podium in a blue gown since she had fought for something important in the past. "I didn't come here to discuss a traffic stop," she said after a brief glance around the room. "I came here to discuss what happens when people are uncomfortable with the truth," and the audience suddenly quieted down. She chose to remain silent when the issue of justice became personal, and I've dedicated my life to studying the law, presenting evidence-based arguments, but nothing had prepared me for the possibility of being perceived as suspicious. In my personal vehicle, none of it had prepared me for the uncertainty, someone's assumption that I was up to no good simply because I couldn't match there. Visualizing a secure environment, she cast a peek towards the rear of the stadium. But here's what I've discovered. There is no need for an opening speech or closing argument when seeking justice does not begin in a courtroom. It all begins when a uniformed official determines who is given a pass based on how they seem. A student whipped out their phone to film someone who does and deserve a second look or a second opportunity. Since Danielle failed to intervene, some have said that I should have accepted the situation as is and moved on. However, by allowing disrespect to become the norm and excusing little infractions, we pave the way for more serious ones. Her voice didn't become louder, but it became more strident as we institutionalize risk. I'm not here today seeking sympathy or praise. I'm here because this matters. That we give things names, even when doing so, makes us feel uneasy, especially when she looked across the room, seeing the eyes of interested people of all ages. To all the young people here who are studying law and want to one day be a judge, always keep in mind that your career involves more than just discussing arguments. It'll also include connecting with people, refusing to let injustice go unchecked, and holding systems responsible every time you're in a situation where you're left wondering, why was I stopped? It doesn't matter if you have a badge, a degree, or a microphone. What matters is that you deserve an answer. The crowd rose up once more, this time in support of non-dramatic performances, since the dignity of every citizen is inviolable. Yet, when individuals drew near her for a handshake, the truth frequently demanded it thereafter. Danielle gracefully navigated between them, offering comforting embraces and words of gratitude. She quickly moved on. Her purpose was not to be appreciated but to leave a lasting impression. As night fell, the sky grew darker, and the parking lot was alive with the sound of people talking and flashing phones. Unlocking her car and opening the door, Danielle walked alone to it. Sat down for a while inside, then got out her phone, put up her notes app, and scribbled out one more phrase before getting in her car and drove away. Justice is not something you do. It's something you practice if you found this tale moving. If this has prompted thought or brought to mind a person you know, please consider subscribing to the channel. Spread the word about this video and don't let the discussion die out. Real-life tales like Danielle Rivers's exist. They have not yet ended and are very much genuine.